The Lanterns of Karaköy. Episode 2. The Garden of Whispers. The travelers stepped out of the cafe into the cool evening air, their coat wrapped loosely around their shoulders. The weight of their decision seemed to settle within them, not as a burden, but as a curious certainty, a feeling of rightness despite the unknown path ahead. Night had fully descended upon Karaköy now, the sky a deep indigo canopy stretching endlessly above the narrow streets. The mist had thickened, pooling around the bases of the lanterns like liquid silver, obscuring the cobblestones beneath. The lanterns glowed more intensely than before, their amber light cutting through the mist with surprising clarity. They formed a distinct path now, no longer simply decorative illuminations, but markers of a journey. The traveler took a deep breath, filling their lungs with the night air scented with jasmine, spice, and something else unnameable, something old and mysterious that seemed to emanate from the lanterns themselves. Their feet moved almost of their own accord, following the golden glow that stretched before them. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly against the ancient buildings that lined the street, each step a gentle percussion marking the beginning of their journey. Behind them, the cafe grew more distant, its warm light fading into the mist, while ahead, the lantern path led deeper into parts of Karaköy the traveler had never seen on any map. The buildings on either side began to change subtly as they walked. What had been familiar Ottoman architecture with its distinctive windows and ornate doorways gradually transformed into something older, something that seemed to predate the city as the traveler knew it. The walls appeared to be made of a stone that gleamed faintly in the lantern light, veined with threads of silver that caught the glow and reflected it back in mesmerizing patterns. The windows became arched and more ornate, their glass stained with colors that shifted as the traveler passed, though no light came from within the buildings themselves. The street narrowed, then widened again, following a logic of its own rather than any urban planning the traveler could discern. The mist parted before them and closed behind, creating the sensation of moving through a corridor of fog. The sounds of the city had fallen away completely now, replaced by a gentle ambient hum that seemed to emanate from the lanterns themselves, a sound felt more than heard, like the vibration of crystal when stroked with a damp finger. Time began to lose its meaning. The traveler could not have said whether they had been walking for minutes or hours. Their body did not tire, and the cool night air kept them comfortable despite the steady pace. The lanterns continued to lead onward, sometimes hanging from unseen wires overhead, sometimes perched on iron stands that lined the path, and occasionally seeming to float freely in the air, defying gravity with serene indifference. Gradually, the traveler became aware of a shift in the atmosphere. The air grew warmer, more fragrant. The scent of jasmine intensified, joined by notes of rose, orange blossom, and other flowers the traveler could not name. The mist thinned slightly, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond the path of lanterns, small flashes of lush greenery that seemed impossible in the heart of a city. The cobblestones beneath their feet gave way to a path of smooth, polished stone that seemed to absorb and reflect the lantern light simultaneously, creating the impression of walking on the surface of a still pond. The buildings fell away entirely, replaced by ancient trees whose massive trunks rose like pillars on either side of the path. Their branches arched overhead, forming a natural cathedral whose ceiling was the night sky itself, pin-pricked with stars that seemed closer and brighter than the traveler had ever seen them. The trees were unlike any the traveler recognized, their bark silver gray and smooth, their leaves a deep emerald that appeared almost luminous in the lantern light. Between the trees, the garden began to reveal itself. Plants of impossible variety grew in artful abundance, creating a landscape that felt both wild and deliberately composed. Flowers bloomed despite the late hour, unfurling petals of midnight blue, silver, and deep purple that seemed to glow with a light of their own. Vines with heart-shaped leaves climbed the tree trunks, occasionally releasing tiny luminescent seeds that floated through the air like miniature lanterns before settling gently on the ground. The path curved, leading the traveler deeper into this impossible garden. Small streams appeared, crossing under ornate stone bridges, their water so clear and still that it was visible only by the way it reflected the lantern light. The sound of flowing water joined the ambient hum of the lanterns, creating a gentle harmony that seemed to resonate within the traveler rather than around them. The traveler paused on one of these bridges, placing their hands on the smooth stone railing. Looking down, they saw not only their reflection, but, just for a moment, other faces too, fleeting and insubstantial, as though others had stood in this same spot throughout time and left echoes of themselves in the water. The faces were not frightening, but peaceful, their expressions serene, their eyes filled with the same wonder the traveler felt. Moving on, the traveler noticed small structures scattered throughout the garden, pavilions of intricately carved stone and wood that seemed to grow from the landscape rather than being built upon it. Their roofs were tiled in materials that caught the light in unexpected ways, sometimes reflecting it perfectly, sometimes seeming to absorb it completely. No two pavilions were identical, yet they shared a harmony of design that suggested a single visionary creator. The lanterns led toward one such pavilion, larger than the others, situated at what appeared to be the center of the garden. Unlike the others, this structure emitted a gentle light of its own, warm and inviting. The traveler approached slowly, taking in its elegant proportions. The pavilion was octagonal, supported by slender columns of a pale stone that seemed to shift between white and the faintest blue. Its roof curved upward to a central peak, topped with what appeared to be a crystal sphere that captured and refracted the lantern light. The interior of the pavilion was visible now, a single room furnished simply with cushions of rich fabric arranged around a low table of polished wood. The floor was inlaid with a mosaic depicting the night sky, the stars represented by tiny pieces of what looked like actual silver. The ceiling mirrored this design, but in reverse, as though the pavilion existed in the space between earth and sky. As the traveler stepped into the pavilion, the lanterns that had guided them suddenly flared brighter for a moment, then dimmed to a softer glow. The effect was that of a gentle sigh, as though the lanterns themselves were relieved that the traveler had reached this destination safely. The traveler felt an inexplicable sense of accomplishment, though they had done nothing more than follow the path laid before them. The cushions looked inviting after the long walk, and the traveler sank down onto them, surprised by their perfect comfort, neither too soft nor too firm. From this vantage point, they could see out through the open sides of the pavilion to the garden beyond, which seemed to extend endlessly in all directions, a labyrinth of beauty that defied the limits of the city that supposedly contained it. A soft, chiming sound drew the traveler's attention to the table before them. Upon it sat a small silver bell that the traveler was certain had not been there a moment before. Beside it was a glass teapot filled with a liquid that glowed with a faint amber light, similar to the lanterns but somehow more alive, as though it contained their essence. 2 cups of thin porcelain, so delicate they appeared translucent, completed the arrangement. Without thinking, the traveler poured the glowing liquid into one of the cups. It moved with a strange fluidity, neither too quickly nor too slowly, and produced no steam despite appearing hot. The scent that rose from it was complex and soothing, reminiscent of the jasmine and spices from the cafe, but with additional notes that evoked memories the traveler didn't even know they possessed. A childhood garden after rain. The pages of an old book opened for the first time, the particular quality of sunlight through stained glass. The traveler raised the cup to their lips and sipped cautiously. The liquid was indeed warm, but not hot, and its taste defied description, changing subtly with each moment it remained on the tongue. It left a pleasant tingling sensation as it was swallowed, and a feeling of clarity spread throughout the traveler's body, as though a veil had been lifted from their senses. The garden around the pavilion seemed to grow more vivid, more present. Colors deepened, scents intensified, and sounds became more distinct. The traveler could now hear the individual notes that made up the ambient hum, realizing it was actually a kind of music, a harmony so perfect and complete that it had originally registered as a single sound. They could distinguish between the different flowing waters of the streams, each with its own voice. Even the rustle of leaves in the gentle night breeze seemed to form words just on the edge of comprehension. Taking another sip of the glowing tea, the traveler noticed movement in the garden. At first, they thought it might be the wind stirring the foliage, but there was an intentionality to it that suggested otherwise. Focusing their gaze, they saw that small points of light were moving between the plants, similar to the lanterns in color, but much smaller and quicker in their movements. They darted among the flowers like fireflies, but with clear purpose rather than random flight. As the traveler watched, these lights began to coalesce into patterns, forming shapes that held for a moment before dissolving and reforming elsewhere. The shapes were complex and beautiful, suggesting symbols or writing in a language the traveler had never seen before, yet somehow understood on an intuitive level. They spoke of growth and connection, of cycles and seasons, of light emerging from darkness and returning to it only to emerge again. The teacup was empty now, though the traveler did not recall drinking the rest of it. They set it gently back on the table, where it made no sound as it touched the wood. The liquid in the teapot had replenished itself, glowing perhaps a little more brightly than before. A soft rustle of fabric drew the traveler's attention to the entrance of the pavilion. The cloaked figure from the cafe stood there, still wrapped in darkness, but with their hood lowered, revealing the swirling golden light that served as their face. In the context of this magical garden, the figure seemed less unsettling than before, more a natural part of the environment than an intruder in the ordinary world. The figure made no sound, but the traveler felt a presence in their mind, similar to what they had experienced in the cafe, but clearer now, more articulate. It conveyed not words exactly, but concepts, images, and emotions that formed a kind of communication more direct and honest than speech could ever be. The traveler understood that this place, this garden, existed in the space between worlds, neither fully in Istanbul, nor entirely separate from it. It had been here long before the city had a name, and would remain long after the city was gone. The lanterns were conduits, connecting this realm to the ordinary world, allowing those rare few who could perceive them to cross the threshold. The figure conveyed that the traveler had been drawn here for a reason, though that reason remained unspecified. There was a role for them to play, a purpose to fulfill, but it would not be revealed all at once. Instead, it would unfold gradually, like a flower opening its petals to the morning sun. The traveler felt questions forming in their mind, and as they did, impressions flowed back in response. Yes, they could return to the ordinary world whenever they wished, by following the lanterns back the way they had come. No, time did not pass here as it did there. They could spend what felt like hours or days in this garden and return to find that only moments had elapsed in Karaköy. Yes, they could come back again, but only when the lanterns called to them. They could not force the crossing on their own. The figure moved further into the pavilion, its form seeming to flow rather than walk. It gestured to the second teacup, and the traveler understood the invitation. They poured the glowing liquid into the empty cup and watched as it rose into the air, suspended before the figure's luminous face. The tea began to orbit slowly, creating a spiral of light that was gradually absorbed into the swirling patterns that constituted the figure's features. A sense of gratitude emanated from the figure, along with something more complex, a feeling of recognition or remembrance, as though the traveler was both a stranger and somehow deeply familiar. There was sadness there too, ancient and profound, but not overwhelming, balanced by an equally ancient joy and wonder. The figure gestured once more, sweeping its arm to indicate the garden beyond the pavilion. The traveler understood that they were free to explore, to wander the paths, and discover what secrets the garden held. There was no danger here, no threat to fear. The garden was a sanctuary, a place of rest and revelation. Rising from the cushions, the traveler felt oddly refreshed, as though the long walk to reach this place had invigorated rather than tired them. They stepped out of the pavilion and onto a new path, this one formed of crushed stone that glittered with tiny fragments of what might have been crystal or diamond. This path led away from the central pavilion and into a part of the garden that seemed wilder, less structured. The trees grew closer together here, their canopies creating a roof of leaves through which the starlight filtered in dappled patterns. The flowers were different too, their blossoms larger and more elaborate, with petals that moved gently even in the absence of a breeze, as though they were breathing. The traveler noticed that the small points of light they had observed earlier were more numerous here, darting between the flowers with increasing speed. They seemed to be communicating with each other, their patterns growing more complex and interconnected. As the traveler watched, a group of these lights broke away from the main body and approached, hovering at eye level. Up close, the lights resolved into tiny, luminous beings, each about the size of a thumb and roughly humanoid in shape, though their features were fluid and indistinct, constantly shifting like the face of the cloaked figure. They gave the impression of curiosity, circling the traveler slowly, occasionally darting in close to examine a button or the fabric of their coat before retreating again. One of the beings, slightly larger than the others, approached the traveler's outstretched hand and landed gently on their palm. Its weight was imperceptible, but there was a warmth, a subtle vibration that traveled up the traveler's arm and settled somewhere in their chest. The tiny being looked up, its face momentarily resolving into something almost human, with eyes that reflected the traveler's face back at them, but multiplied, as though seen through a kaleidoscope. The being took off again, rejoining its companions, and together they formed a loose formation that moved slowly along the path, glancing back occasionally, as if to ensure the traveler was following. Understanding the invitation, the traveler continued along the crystal path, deeper into this wilder section of the garden. The path began to slope gently downward, and the vegetation on either side grew taller, creating a corridor of green that eventually opened onto a clearing. In the center of this space was a pool of water so still that it mirrored the sky above perfectly, creating the disorienting impression that the traveler was looking both up and down at the same time. The pool was surrounded by smooth stones arranged in concentric circles, reminiscent of ripples frozen in time. The luminous beings darted across the surface of the pool, their reflections creating the illusion of twice their number. They gathered on the far side, where a large flat stone jutted out over the water like a natural platform or stage. Once assembled, they began to move in coordination, forming patterns that were clearly deliberate, almost like a dance or ritual. As the traveler watched, these patterns began to generate a soft, musical sound, as though the movement itself was creating vibrations in the air. The sound grew more complex as the dance continued, evolving from simple tones into melodies and harmonies that seemed to resonate with the pool, causing the slightest of ripples to form on its mirror-like surface. The ripples caught the light from the beings and the stars above, refracting it in unexpected ways. The patterns of light spread outward from the center of the pool, eventually reaching the stone rim, where they began to climb upward, defying gravity. The light formed three-dimensional shapes in the air above the pool, intricate geometries that rotated slowly, revealing different aspects of themselves as they turned. The traveler found themselves moving closer, drawn by the beauty of this impossible display. As they approached the edge of the pool, one of the light patterns detached itself from the main body and floated toward them. It hovered at eye level, rotating slowly, and the traveler realized it was forming a representation of their face, constructed entirely of light and shadow. The face was accurate but idealized, showing not just what the traveler was, but what they could be, their best and truest self. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected potential rather than reality, possibility rather than fact. The traveler lifted a hand toward this apparition, and as their fingers made contact with the light, a surge of emotion flowed through them, a complex mixture of joy, longing, determination, and peace. The light face dissolved back into abstract patterns, rejoining the dance above the pool. But something of it remained with the traveler, a feeling of having been seen and understood on a level deeper than they had ever experienced before. It was both profound and unsettling, like a truth heard for the first time, but immediately recognized as something always known. The dance of lights continued, the patterns growing more complex, the music more elaborate. The traveler sat on one of the stones surrounding the pool, content to watch and listen, to absorb the experience without needing to understand it completely. Time passed differently here, expanding and contracting according to its own rules. What felt like hours might have been minutes, or days, or mere seconds. Eventually the dance began to slow, the patterns simplifying, the music fading to a gentle hum. The luminous beings separated, their formation breaking apart as they drifted away from the pool in different directions, disappearing among the foliage. Only the larger being remained, hovering above the water for a moment longer before flying to the traveler and circling their head once, leaving a faint trail of golden light in its wake. Then it too departed, vanishing into the garden. The traveler sat in silence for a time, processing what they had witnessed. The pool before them had returned to its perfect stillness, once again reflecting the star-filled sky above. But the feeling of connection, of having been part of something meaningful, lingered. Rising from the stone, the traveler felt drawn to continue exploring. The crystal path extended beyond the clearing, winding between ancient trees whose branches were hung with tiny bell-shaped flowers that chimed softly in the gentle breeze. The sound was soothing, reminding the traveler of the bells they had heard when first seeing the lanterns from the ferry. The path climbed gradually now, leading up a gentle slope. The trees began to thin, allowing broader views of the night sky. The stars above seemed to have shifted, forming new constellations unfamiliar to the traveler. Some appeared to move, tracing slow arcs across the darkness, while others pulsed rhythmically, growing brighter and dimmer in cycles. Cresting the hill, the traveler found themselves looking out over a vast expanse of the garden, far larger than should have been possible within the confines of Karaköy. From this vantage point, they could see that the entire garden was arranged in an enormous pattern, a spiraling mandala of paths, pools, pavilions, and plantings that centered on the octagonal structure where they had first sat. The pattern was reminiscent of the swirling mass of light that constituted the cloaked figure's face, suggesting a connection between the two. Perhaps the garden was a reflection of the figure, or the figure was an embodiment of the garden. The distinction seemed less important than the harmony between them. In the far distance, at what appeared to be the edge of the garden, the traveler could just make out the glittering line of lanterns that marked the boundary between this realm and the ordinary world. Beyond them, partially obscured by mist, the familiar silhouette of Istanbul was visible, its minarets and domes reduced to tiny shadows against the night sky. The juxtaposition of the magical and the mundane was striking, a reminder that the two worlds existed side by side, separated by nothing more than perception and belief. The traveler found this thought comforting, suggesting as it did that wonder and mystery were never far away, even in the most familiar of places. A subtle movement in the periphery of their vision drew the traveler's attention. Turning, they saw the cloaked figure standing nearby, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. It made no sound, but the traveler felt its presence in their mind once more, conveying a sense of time passing, of cycles completing. The visit to the garden was nearing its end, at least for now. The traveler nodded in understanding, feeling a mixture of reluctance to leave and anticipation of return. The figure extended a hand, indicating a new path that led down the far side of the hill, a route the traveler had not seen before. This, they understood, would lead them back to the boundary, to the lanterns that would guide them home. As they began to descend the path, the traveler looked back once more at the magnificent vista of the garden. In the moment of turning, they caught a glimpse of something they had not noticed before: other figures moving among the distant trees and pavilions, other visitors exploring their paths through the garden. The traveler realized they were not the only one called by the lanterns, not the only one to cross the threshold between worlds. This knowledge brought both comfort and curiosity. Who were these others? What had drawn them here? Would their paths ever cross? The questions remained unanswered as the traveler continued down the hill, the vista behind them gradually obscured by the trees that closed around the path. The way back felt both shorter and more direct than the winding route that had led the traveler to the central pavilion. The trees parted to reveal small clearings filled with flowers that glowed softly in the darkness. Streams crossed the path, their waters singing gentle melodies as they flowed over carefully arranged stones. Occasionally, the traveler caught glimpses of the luminous beings darting among the foliage, watching curiously but keeping their distance. The path gradually straightened, and the vegetation began to change, becoming more recognizable, more like the plants one might find in an ordinary Turkish garden. The wild, magical quality of the landscape faded by degrees, replaced by a more cultivated beauty. The traveler realized they were approaching the boundary. Soon, the first of the lanterns appeared, hanging from a wrought iron stand beside the path. Its light was warm and welcoming, familiar after the strange illumination of the garden's interior. More lanterns became visible ahead, forming the pathway that would lead back to Karaköy. The traveler paused at this threshold, feeling the pull of both worlds. Behind them lay mystery and wonder, a place outside of ordinary time and space. Ahead lay the comfort of the familiar, the grounding reality of the city, with its sounds and smells and solid certainties. Both had their appeal, their kind of magic. A soft chime sounded, and the traveler turned to find the cloaked figure standing beside them once more. Its luminous face swirled with patterns that conveyed reassurance and promise. This was not a final farewell, merely a temporary parting. The lanterns would call again when the time was right, when the garden had something new to reveal, or when the traveler most needed what it offered. With a nod of understanding, the traveler turned back toward the lantern path. The first step felt significant, a choice rather than a necessity. The second step came easier, and the third easier still. Soon, the traveler was walking steadily along the illuminated way, the soft glow of the lanterns lighting their path back to the ordinary world. The mist began to thicken once more, swirling around the bases of the lanterns, obscuring what lay between them. The traveler focused on the lights ahead, trusting them to lead the way. The sounds of the garden faded gradually, replaced by the distant murmur of the city, growing clearer with each step. The path curved, and suddenly the traveler was back on a cobblestone street, the buildings of Karaköy rising on either side. The architecture was once again familiar, Ottoman and contemporary structures standing side by side. The smell of the sea returned, mingled with the urban sense of cooking and car exhaust and humanity. The lanterns continued to guide the traveler through the streets, which were oddly empty despite the hour not being particularly late. Perhaps time had passed differently than the traveler realized, or perhaps the lanterns were leading them along paths less traveled. Whatever the reason, the traveler was grateful for the solitude, the chance to transition gradually back to the ordinary world. The path eventually led to a small square that the traveler recognized, though they had not passed through it on their way to the garden. In the center stood a fountain, dry now but beautiful in its carved stone detail. The cafe, Fener, was visible on the far side, its windows still glowing with warm light, suggesting it remained open despite the hour. The traveler hesitated, unsure whether to return to the cafe or continue to find accommodation for the night. As they pondered, the lanterns along the street began to dim, very slowly, one by one. The garden's influence was waning, the boundary between worlds growing more distinct. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of jasmine one last time. With it came a sense of completion, of a circle closing. The traveler had followed the lanterns and found something extraordinary, something that would stay with them long after this night was over. They had crossed a threshold and returned, changed in ways that would only become clear with time. The final lantern flickered once, twice, and then stabilized, its warm glow a constant in the night. The traveler smiled, understanding the message in this simple act. Some lights never truly go out. They merely await the right moment to guide the way once more. With this thought warming them like the glowing tea they had drunk in the pavilion, the travelers stepped forward into the square, ready to discover what else this night in Karaköy might hold. Sleep well. Good night.